panel. Let's bring in David Dietze. He's Managing Principal Senior Portfolio Strategist at Peapack Private Wealth Management. David, what does the next 4 years mean for the markets? Trump he didn't hesitate to take credit for those stock market rallies, but do you think this is going to continue under Biden?
Well, no one on Wall Street has a 4-year view anymore. But certainly, I think we're going to be off to a good start here. The number one reason, of course, has nothing to do with Biden. It really has to do with the vaccines. We've got two great ones. We've got Pfizer, Moderna. Very soon we should have Novavax and J&J. But perhaps the Biden administration can provide more coordination of the delivery of these vaccines and get more people to take them and, of course, to stay safe in the interim. So to that extent, perhaps the Biden administration will have an edge over the Trump administration. After that, of course, is a litany of government stimulus. It is coming from two sides. You've got, of course, Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve, continuing to pin down interest rates. We saw a backup in the 10-year yield this year, but he rushed right out and say, we see no reason in terms of inflation or anything like that to worry about higher interest rates at any time in the foreseeable future. And of course, we have now President Biden has announced he wants to up the stimulus to $1.9 trillion. Everyone's going to have another $1,400 in their pocket, or about $2,000 if you have $75,000 or less in terms of income. And of course, a lot of help to the states and so forth to pay for the vaccine costs, higher minimum wage, all those things. So I think that's going to keep this party going.
But, to your point on how there's been promises of a big stimulus package, it's got to be funded somehow, and that could mean higher taxes. Certainly, it seems like the Democrat Party has committed in some sense to that. Do you think that would undo the lower corporate taxes, which during the Trump tenure helped unlock all these stock market rallies?
Well, let's start from the premise that the government can't just print prosperity or spend prosperity with money that it doesn't have. So eventually we will have to have higher rates to tamp down inflation, and we will have to look at taxes. There's some sort of reduced spending. Right now, it doesn't seem to be anywhere in sight. It's a bipartisan initiative, really, to get as much stimulus as possible out there. The only argument is to how narrowly focused is it, make sure it gets to the people who need it. But eventually, taxes will become an issue. But, we have seen for the last 15 years, it doesn't matter whether you're a fiscal conservative or not, no one wants to raise taxes. At this point, in an absence of inflation, with the interest rates on debt as low as it is, no one seems to be worrying about the federal deficit. So I think that's kicked down the road. And of course, remember, raising taxes is anti-stimulus. As long as experts like Jerome Powell and the new Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says we need more stimulus, it seems taxes are antithetical to that. So eventually it's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen in 2021. That may be a minority view. Of course, there are partisans out there. And of course, by 2022, people will be worrying about the midterm elections and who's going to control the House that may get kicked down the road to the back half of Mr. Biden's term.
Okay, you brought up an interesting point about how neither side of the aisle wants to raise taxes. The other thing we see bipartisan support for is how they want to take on big tech. There was worry that Biden presidency would mean a difficult time for some of these giants, but we saw the NASDAQ rallying almost 2% overnight. Do you think this is something that will continue?
That's a great point, that the standout sectors in this Inauguration Day rally were the tech sectors, and they are the ones that are perhaps most under the gun in terms of antitrust reform and so forth. I think that, first of all, a lot of the big techs have kind of flatlined since September 2nd, so they were perhaps due to catch up with some of the cyclical trade. I also think that At the end of the day, these are huge companies and so forth, and to pursue any types of legal remedies often can take years. If you go back and look at, the case against Microsoft in the late 1990s, IBM and AT&T before that, it took many, many years before there was actually any kind of resolution to it. So I think there's a lot of tailwind here, and of course they are international companies too, so that to the extent that they're under pressure here in the United States, there's all sorts of markets that they can profitably keep operating in overseas. So, it's something to think about longer term, but I just don't think investors are overly concerned about it today.
Okay, David, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. That was David Dietze from Peapack Private Wealth.